All right. Hello, world. Welcome to Data Endures November Tech Talk. We're excited today to be launching our Disruptor series. We are joined by Shaheen Peruz, Data Endures Chief Technology Officer and Chief Information Security Officer. And our special guest today is Brian Carmody. He is from Infinidat, and he is their Chief Technology Officer. So welcome to the literal hot seat. we had a little camera and lighting issue before you all joined, so got a little smoke going on in here, a little excitement.
So it's not mood music. We actually lost the light.
So welcome. We're excited to be launching this Disruptor edition. This is an opportunity where Shaheen and I invite a partner in who represents a technology who is really taking a different angle at maybe a traditional business or technology issue, just looking at it different and really changing the market. So Brian is here, and we're going to have a great conversation about what Infinidat's doing and what the opportunity is for folks out there. So I'll let you guys lead off.
So just to add a little bit to that, we have for every single technology category that we represent a anchor partner, which is somebody who's been in the industry forever, who's doing things, they're well known, you can't go wrong with picking them. And we also have what we call our disruptor techs. And Infinidat is the disruptive tech for storage in our portfolio. And I want to spend today talking a little bit about why we chose Infinidat as our disruptive tech. And I'd also like Brian to chime in and provide insight into why they've done what they do to disrupt the market. Effectively for us, we picked Infinidat. We were going through multiple iterations of reviews with technology partners and where they were at. And out of a wonderful set of circumstances, we got introduced to Infinidat. And I was blown away almost immediately and completely doubtful that it actually did what you said it does. And
we get that a lot.
Yeah, and I said, this is really cool. Concept is really cool. Storage has been done the same way for the last 30 years. And what you're claiming is unbelievable. And I don't believe it. And we went down a dialogue. And Brian, you talked to me through what you've done, how you've done it, and why you've done it. And I'd like to share some of that with our guests today. So without further ado, why don't you give us a little walkthrough of that same conversation we had in terms of why Infinidat is and why you guys did what you did.
Oh, sure. I'm not sure if I remember that exact conversation.
Right. We'll come to you.
But we can totally talk about some of the work that Infinidat is doing and some of the stuff that we're doing together. Information storage is kind of it's part of the invisible infrastructure that powers humanity. And if you look at like the progress of civilizations over time, it's inextricably linked to a society's ability to store and retain knowledge. Going all the way back to cuneiform tablets and everything. I mean, you can draw a line through innovations over time. Gutenberg's press, and the invention of magnetic storage in the 50s and everything. And so it's one of the most interesting, I think, hard tech problems that still exist, information storage.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting hard tech problems that still exists that has just a huge positive impact on humanity. So the problem that kind of Infinidat has been obsessed with, since our founding in 2011, is how to build vessels for storing human knowledge, containers that are much, much larger, much, much more resilient, and much, much cheaper than anything that's commercially available elsewhere. And you're absolutely right. Like you were kind of saying, the modern data storage industry is about 70 years old, going back to the RAMAC technology, for mainframe storage for IBM. And that about 70-year history, everybody's pretty much been doing the same thing, which is you think of storage systems as hardware devices. And you innovate in hardware to make them better, faster. And so every generation of storage technology is always a story about hardware. It's about 10,000 RPM and 15,000 RPM. And then it was about the SLC and MLC and QLC. But it's all physics, it's hardware. So our big idea is, what if we could reimagine information storage as a software problem? And think of it as a computer algorithm. What if we could find a way to take the cheapest media that exists, and right now that's spinning nearline SAS drives, it's magnetic hard disks. And what if we could implement the memory hierarchy on top of that, and have some really smart computer algorithms that manage that memory hierarchy? And what if we could turn lead into gold? What if we could build systems that have a price point that is around that spinning magnetic disk, but has a performance profile that look like petabyte scale RAM disks? And that's exactly what InfiniBox, which is our flagship product, that's exactly what it does. So it's, often a tenth of the cost of an all-flash array, but it will destroy any commercially available all-flash array on performance. It has mainframe class reliability, and it does all those things simultaneously.
It's magic.
It
Sounds too good to be true.
We just for some context for the audience, we have a couple of very large POCs with very large Fortune 100 companies going right now, and we had a conversation with the executive technology team for storage of a huge service provider, one of the big three service providers, and the conversation was, after the presentation of what InfiniBox is and what InfiniDAT does, they switched immediately to, if this does half of what they say it's going to do, we're in and we're going to do this. So let's get the POC going. We did the POC, and they took their largest Windows workloads, which was a particular customer that has been very challenging to make happy on performance in a cloud-based environment. And they moved a copy of that workload onto the InfiniBox, and they got 10x the performance they were getting out of their previous storage. And the conversation we had with them with InfiniDAT was, you're going to see 2 to 4x better performance. And so they were blown away by the 10x ratio.
As a little bit there.
Yeah, exactly.
Smart.
So that's for me. It started out in a similar way where I was like, if this does half of what you say it does, it's amazing. And we've seen in POCs that it in fact not only does half, but does double what you said it does. So it's been an interesting journey together. And one interesting thing that I don't remember if it was you that said it to me or Craig, which is our channel partner, but the topic was traditional storage that is accessible to the enterprise has been something that enterprise storage architects can easily build and manage and develop, but it's expensive. So they have to create these teams that are focused on storage and how they do it. But if you take a look at all the hyperscalers today, not one of them buys enterprise storage. They build their own. And the reality is that one of the things you guys looked at is, if these hyperscalers can get away with this software-based and commodity-based hardware, why couldn't we bring that to the enterprise? And I think, in fact, you have.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting way of thinking about InfiniDAT from a product perspective. CIOs today have this awful dichotomy. A CIO, she can move everything into a hyperscaler environment. So rent capacity from AWS, from Google, from whatever. Or you can build it in-house. But at the bottom of the infrastructure, the tools that are available, or that were available for storage, are terrible. They're garbage. They're literally 1980s and 90s software technologies goosed up with more modern hardware and more expensive hardware, but
forget that.
And so the on-premises computing teams are dealing with this huge infrastructure disadvantage. at the compute layer, at the networking layer, all the innovations that are happening with software-defined networking and containers and Kubernetes. Up here, it's a fair game against the public clouds. Ultimately, this stuff has to run on something. The bits and bytes have to live somewhere. And if you're trying to compete with your on-premises technology, you're trying to compete against AWS and Google, and you're trying to do it with EMC and Hitachi storage arrays, you're bringing a knife to a gunfight.
Exactly.
And we want to be the Uzi or what, I don't know.
The big guns.
The big guns.
It's an
Yes.
analogy, yes.
Yeah, sir.
That was really one of the things that conversation was really one of the things that caught my attention to continue the dialogue and learn more about
Yeah.
you, because prior to that conversation, I had never heard of Infinidat. It was the first time that Infinidat came into my life, and it was one of the aha moments, like how did this technology just breeze by? And part of that is that you guys are on the East Coast, and West Coast companies aren't super familiar with you, which we love because we are the West Coast representative.
Yeah.
But that was the moment for me when I said that conceptually makes complete sense to me. How do we bring hyperscale storage capabilities to the enterprise without having to have a team of scientists run? And that's exactly, I believe, the construct. That's when I talk to customers, that's the dialogue I have with them. You don't have to go in and build a science project and figure out how to get cheap storage. There's an enterprise class solution with sort that's already pre-built, ready to go, that gives you all of that, and then some. And here it is. So it's been a really great dialogue. It's a game changer, and every single person I've talked to is immediately the first response. That sounds too good to be true. And the POCs, it kind of forces the POCs, but the POCs have all been fantastic. So it's been great.
No, I appreciate that. And the feeling is mutual. We're on a mission, to transform the data storage industry and to give a very sleepy industry and a industry that's frankly has had an innovation deficit, for a while, give it a kind of kick in the butt. But that's a big mission. We can't do it alone. And so partnerships are so important. And you guys are doing amazing work with cybersecurity, kind of how I think you guys first got on our radar with some of the amazing work you're doing in cyber. And so I think that right here, if we draw, a 15-mile radius circle around your space here in San Jose, I think this is going to be $1 billion market for Infinidat in 5 years.
I agree.
And it's all about the right. We have the right technology. We figured that stuff out. But now it's about who are the right partners to go take this on and go build something amazing.
Yep.
So I'm super psyched about where they're going.
We are too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's in the context of this Disruptor series. It's for us. It's always been about, can't just go to the customer and do another Me Too and keep doing the same things over and over again. That our customers expect from us. We have some very large customers, and they expect from us to bring new technologies they haven't heard about. So part of what my team's challenge is going out and finding technologies like you, which I was super excited when I did, and when it proved out to be accurate and do what you said it does. It allows us to have those dialogues with customers to say, look, here's a fantastic technology. You may not have heard about it, but you have to listen to it. And so our Disruptor series is all about that. And so I'll thank you for joining us. I don't know, Kirsten, do you have any comments or adds you want to?
I just think it might be helpful, Brian, for you, as you guys have brought this to market and you're seeing so much momentum. For folks that are listening out there, where are the areas in the market, whether it's use cases or whether it's industries or whether it's company types? Who are the people that are really jumping onto this quickly and saying, this is something I got to do? Because in a lot of cases, a lot of people will say, intellectually, this is very interesting, but where are people moving? And for those folks who are listening, who fits?
Sure, great question. So our total customer footprint as of the beginning of this month is 5.6 exabytes of customer data. So that's 5.6 billion gigs. So it's a big footprint. So there's a lot of diversity in that, but kind of breakdown of where our technology is being used. About 20% of our customer base is cloud and managed service providers. So these are firms where they have everything up to a hypervisor, and then whatever's happening above the hypervisor, they have no idea, because that's the customer's domain. So the infrastructure has to be able to do anything. That's about 20%. Another 15 to 18% is life sciences and healthcare. So that's another industry that is in the throes of digital transformation, electronic medical health records, and stuff like that.
And performance matters.
And
For sure.
performance, in the emergency room when they're waiting for a X-ray to come up,
Right.
microseconds matter.
My wife used to say to me long ago, she said, I don't know why you're staying at work so late, why you carry a pager, you're not saving lives. And then as the medical industry started going to digital transformation and through it, all of a sudden the technologies we implement and support do save lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then just to round it off, manufacturing is one of our fastest growing segments, especially in the Midwest. And then the kind of old school Infinidad, where we first had big traction, was in banking and insurance. So core banking applications. Again, these are services that measure uptime in decades for availability of these services. That is where we first had our early traction, and that continues to be huge. So basically, the short answer to your question, who should be interested? Anybody who has huge amounts of data, that has extremely stringent reliability requirements, that has a 100% availability need, but they don't want to spend all of their IT budget by writing huge checks to lazy old school enterprise storage companies. If all those three things are true, they should talk to you guys and maybe have a conversation about Infinidad.
So one of the things you mentioned is somebody who has large amounts of data, and the logic behind that, I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me, but the logic behind that is that if you don't have a significant amount of data, the value proposition isn't really as clear.
Yeah.
As you get larger and larger in requirements for storage and amounts of data that you're storing, then the value proposition shines massively. But if you're looking at 100 terabytes is not going to be cost effective on Infinidad any more than it is on.
100%.
Yeah.
And we the way that we see it is the kind of terabyte scale computing space is a solved problem. It's very well covered. And if you have a terabyte scale storage problem, go call Pure Storage, go call NetApp, and go buy an all-flash array and be done with it. And you're going to love it. It's great. It is essentially a solved problem. Multi-enterprise is very much, where all the interesting stuff is happening. It's where all the knife fights, from a technology perspective, and roadmaps are happening.
Right.
And that's what Infinidad is exclusively focused on.
And primarily the moving parts underneath that are when you start thinking about the disks that are in these storage arrays. If you take and buy that much all-flash arrays, you're adding a lot of very expensive disks to an architecture, which is why it literally parabolically goes out of control in terms of price compared to what Infinidad is able to bring to the market.
Yeah, so there's a cost reason why there isn't petabyte scale anything in the flash world. You'd be laughed out of any data center, any hyperscaler data center. If you go and you tell them you're going to make them an all-flash data center, it's a preposterous argument financially. But there's also architectural, there's scalability reasons.
Absolutely.
Why, when you're thinking orders of magnitude larger than another piece of technology, just the software engineering was very different and stuff like that. But at multi-petabyte scale, disk is king for storing cold data. And that's one of the key things that as enterprises now are starting, because of digital transformation, are starting to deal with large data sets, making friends with those big old spinning disk drives for storing cold data, which is commonplace with hyperscalers, but it's a relatively new idea for the enterprise because they've been so focused on all flash for the past decade. Those are at least some really cool and interesting conversations with customers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The conversations I've been having with customers, and for our listeners who are asking themselves, do I fit or do I not fit in this dialogue? Usually I think about it in the context of if you're below 100 terabyte, to your point, this isn't something that's going to, technology-wise, and if you're planning to scale and grow and you have data consumption needs to get to petabyte scale, then absolutely, because it will scale from a price perspective better than anything else, and from a performance perspective better than anything else. But if that's your size and that's where you're at, and there's no growth in the future, then I agree, and that's the dialogue I've been having with customers. Is there's plenty of solutions that fit, and we can help with that. But if you're over that 100 petabyte and there is an upside to it, then there's definitely a fit. And I'm sorry, 100 terabytes. I said 100 petabytes. If you're over 100 petabytes, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely. They definitely want to talk to you.
It's the sweet spot that I've seen, and this is the real question I'm asking you is, it seems to be that about 500 terabytes is the tipping point. Do you feel the same?
Yeah. 500 terabytes is where the conversations start to get interesting.
Right.
But one thing that I hope everybody keeps in mind is that supply creates demand, and it doesn't matter what a customer's industry is, because digital transformation is blowing up every industry. When you put petabytes of very low cost storage in the hands of your developers, their creativity and their genius goes to work, and they will create new ideas and new solutions and new products to delight your customers. And so supply creates demand. That's
couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
It's that story of the hyperscaler that is now, you have the ability to do that same thing inside your four walls, where if you look at all the startups that have been innovative and changed the way things work, they're born in the cloud and they have access to unlimited cheap storage to store their data in their object buckets and everything else up there. And so being able to do that in your development environment on-prem is a huge capability that means now you can control cost a little better and not get run away. Let's call it VM sprawl or cloud sprawl or
Right.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So that's actually what you're describing is a huge part of what we call our elastic data fabric strategy.
And that doesn't have to do with eating too much at Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
Elastic fabrics, different.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Good
No,
timing.
No, EDF is at its core. We believe that hardware-based storage appliances are a technological dead end. They're basically we're at the end of the road.
Right.
Digital transformation is making the data sets way too large for these hardware-based appliances anymore. So they're going to evolve into something, or they are evolving into something. And our belief is that something is they're evolving into data center scale on-premises storage clouds. So this is a user experience that's similar to what a business line can get when they plunk down their credit card and they start consuming resources in AWS or in Google Cloud or whatever. But it's that user experience, it's that agility, it's that low friction, but it's on premises using assets that belong to the company. So it's much cheaper than renting capacity from a hyperscaler. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And it's going to be a very painful transition because the old incumbents are clinging to this model that the pinnacle of innovation are these hardware, proprietary, ridiculous hardware appliances. And that's the pinnacle of innovation in storage. And I think they're so far behind that they think they're ahead.
I agree.
So,
I agree. Their notion of cloud integration is we offload to S3.
yeah.
It's interesting. Can you talk for a moment about what you're doing in the context of hybrid in that space.
Oh, sure. So the the war between public cloud and on-premises is over, and hybrid cloud won.
Mhm.
And so virtually every enterprise customer has some data on-premises. They have some data in public clouds. They have managed service providers. The data is all over the place.
Yeah.
So what Infinidat does is we give customers the tools to glue all of that into a single storage fabric that's managed as a single entity that gets and moves data wherever it needs to be. So, for example, our customers can have data center scale on-premises pools of storage in their own data centers, but they can easily replicate and move that data to the public clouds. And it's transparent. It happens in the background. So there's mobility in this dimension from the public clouds to on-premises. And now we're starting to pay a lot of attention to a different axis, which is the core edge strategy. So, for instance, we're working with a group of industry folks that are dealing with autonomous vehicles.
Yep.
These vehicles produce a petabyte of data per week per vehicle.
Wow.
A petabyte of data per week per vehicle. They're not going to store all of that data forever, but they have to store it long enough to process it.
Do some analytics, whatever.
Right. So some of that analytics is happening in core data centers that are potentially 1,000 miles away from where the vehicle are located. Some of those computations are happening at the cell tower, within radio distance of the vehicles. So this axis from core to edge is the kind of new dimension for data mobility and data
So
access.
how do you stretch storage to the edge?
Yeah. So now, if you think about the core of our technology inside of an InfiniBox is called Neural Cache, and it's basically a logistics algorithm that moves the right pieces of data to the right place in the memory hierarchy at just the right time. It's a caching algorithm. A lot of the
Which is, by the way, the most brilliant part of the technology, and we've spent no time talking about it until now.
yes.
He'll be back.
Yeah, we'll do it again. But we're starting to now pay a lot of attention to, if you think about cache management as a logistics problem, if you think along the core edge dimension of moving the right pieces of data and getting them close to users, close to endpoint devices, whether that endpoint device is an IoT node, whether it's a mobile phone, whether it's an autonomous vehicle. And so that's kind of some of the stuff that we're thinking about and working on from a research perspective. All I can promise you guys is the next decade is going to be incredibly interesting for information storage. It kind of been in a funk since the kind of late 90s. Innovation has cratered. A couple of incumbents have just been, letting it ride. Their businesses are disintegrating, before their eyes. They're being disrupted by young companies and young technologies. The next decade is going to be probably the most interesting decade for information storage since the 1950s and the development of magnetic disks. So
It's exciting stuff.
it's really cool stuff. It's a fun time to be alive and working on hard tech problems.
If you could just spend like a couple minutes and talk about the predictive caching that your NeuroCache
sure.
does, because I think that's a hugely valuable asset and why you're able to use magnetic disk as opposed to a flash.
Yeah. So the basic idea is that the only medium that's fast enough to deliver storage for modern, workloads, it's not spinning disk, it's not flash, it's not even really 3D crosspoint and storage class memory. The latencies are too high. Those media are too slow. The only thing that can serve data and keep, CPUs full of the data they're looking for, and GPUs, is DRAM. Problem is, DRAM is ridiculously expensive. If we could give customers petabytes of DRAM, they would take it, but it would cost as much as a jet airplane.
Mhm.
So what we do instead is we build storage systems that look like icebergs. They have small amounts, relatively small amounts, terabytes of RAM as a primary medium for the applications to deal with, and also a larger amount of NAND flash. And that's, using the iceberg analogy, that's all that's visible above the waterline. And that's used for storing the hot working set of data. And from an applications perspective, that's all they see.
Mhm.
What applications don't know is that below that waterline are petabytes and petabytes of spinning magnetic disk that we use for storing cold data. And that's not necessarily a new idea. That's
Right.
called hybrid storage or
Tiering or
hierarchical storage management,
Yeah.
depending on how old you are. So that's not a new idea. The new idea is the computer algorithms that we use for managing that memory hierarchy. For us, it's called neural cache. It's the core cluster of, we have 140 something software patents, and that is one of the core set of patents, is the algorithms for managing that memory hierarchy. And its job is very simple. It's to get a piece of data and make sure that any piece of data that a host is going to request, get it into RAM just in time before that access request comes in.
How hard can that be?
It sounds ridiculous because what you're asking it to do is to predict the future.
Right.
But in the very narrowly defined problem domain of predicting IOs,
Mhm.
when you look at histories, you can make predictions about the future.
Right.
So if you make the problem,
This application has done these things in the past, so it's probably going to do them again.
data isn't random. They're organized into records.
Right.
Records have correlations and links.
Right.
These problems are very well understood in other domains, recommendation engines for e-commerce
Mhm.
and stuff like that. But up until now, people really haven't been applying those to infrastructure problems and storage performance. But
Because you can just throw more hardware at it.
yes, that's you can always buy time by throwing more hardware at it.
Exactly.
But with budget realities, that's I'm not sure how viable that is as a long run strategy. So
Agreed. And is it safe to say, I say this and I'm validating with you now that we're sitting here, that is the innovation that has disrupted this space?
oh yeah, it's Mark Andreessen. Software is eating the world.
Yeah.
The storage industry has been kind of immune to that because, again, it's so hardware centric. But that's at heart, it's that disruption. It's that computer algorithms software beats hardware any day of the week.
Mhm.
You have to build the right software and you have to get all the details right. And that's kind of what we're super focused on right now.
Excellent.
Well, I know we're close to the end of our time, but just as we quickly wrap up, earlier we had talked a little bit about some of the POCs that we have going on, and I was surprised to hear how quickly our customers were able to see results. And
Oh, yeah.
so in 30 seconds or whatever, can we just talk about, for folks out there that are thinking, okay, so is this POC a 6-month process, or, what is it going to take for me to actually see if this works quickly,
Absolutely.
what might the experience be like?
So we did a POC with an InfiniBox at a very large customer that we were able to deploy. We basically got approval from the customer, ordered the equipment, had it shipped to the facilities, had it installed, had the first workloads running on it within about a 6-week period. So it's very fast. The process is super smooth. There's obviously some change control, and they were motivated to make these changes happen. But excluding whatever your change control process is, the process to get the POC up and running and working and get a workload on it is super fast, and there is really no fine tuning of the box to make it work. It's you just turn it on, connect to it, and start functioning. So that was the beauty. And for those of you who've been in the enterprise storage space for a long time, I had teams of engineers that would fine tune how we mapped our LUNs, how we did our aggregates, how we did all the things we do to get the best performance out of the tiered storage architectures that we were using. And none of that is really in context here because the software does everything. Super easy.
Yeah, like in other domains, what everybody is trying to focus on is how to automate all the boring, tedious parts of storage administration and infrastructure in general, so that the smart engineers that are responsible for these infrastructures can spend their time working on more interesting problems.
Bring more value to the
And
company.
tiering and that's not fun work. There's let the Infinidat AI robot make those placement decisions in real time.
Yeah.
And you can focus on more fun stuff and keeping your customers happy and other stuff like that.
Bringing value to the company is like that. There's so many smart brains that I've had working for me that I would have rather had innovating than operating, and there was so much operating happening.
Yeah. No CIO ever gets her team together and says, "I want to spend next year thinking about enterprise storage."
Yep.
Because there's no, but enterprise storage is so ridiculously expensive, both from a CapEx and an operational perspective.
Mhm.
When you bring in disruptive technology like Infinidat, you get a step function reduction in your CapEx, in your OpEx, and then you take that capital that gets freed up and you go do more interesting things with it.
So,
And that's something from a storage admin who's overworked dealing with crappy technology all the way up to C-level tech executives. That's something that everybody is interested in.
and it's easy to understand.
Spend less money on storage, spend money on better, more interesting things.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a perfect wrap to today's conversation.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
It's
for
been awesome to have you, and I would imagine we'll have you back to drill down into some other things and also to talk about some customer successes.
Yes.
That would be
So-
awesome.
Yes.
Thanks.
So thank you, and we'll see you in December.